The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Chapters 7, 8, and 9. Vogon poetry is, of course, the third worst in the universe. The second worst is that of the Asgoths of Kriya. During a recitation by their poet master, Grunthos the Flatulent, of his poem Ode to a Small Lump of Green Putty I Found in My Armpit One Midsummer Morning, 4 of his audience died of internal hemorrhaging, and the president of the Mid-Galactic Arts Nobbling Council survived by gnawing off one of his own legs. Grunthos is reported to have been disappointed by the poem's reception and was about to embark on reading his 12-book epic entitled My Favourite Bath Time Gurgles when his own major intestine, in a desperate attempt to save life and civilization, leapt straight up through his neck and throttled his brain. The very worst poetry of all perished along with its creator, Paula Nancy Millstone Jennings of Greenbridge, Essex, England, in the destruction of the planet Earth. Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz smiled very slowly. This was done not so much for effect as because he was trying to remember the sequence of muscle movements. He had had a terribly therapeutic yell at his prisoners and was now feeling quite relaxed and ready for a little callousness. The prisoners sat in poetry appreciation chairs, strapped in. Vogon suffered no illusions as to their regard their works were generally held in. Their early attempts at composition had been part of a bludgeoning insistence that they be accepted as a properly evolved and cultured race, but now the only thing that kept them going was sheer bloody-mindedness. The sweat stood out cold on Ford Prefect's brow and slid round the electrodes strapped to his temples. These were attached to a battery of electronic equipment, imagery intensifiers, rhythmic modulators, alliterative residulators, and simile dumpers, all designed to heighten the experience of the poem and make sure not a single nuance of the poet's thought was lost. Arthur Dent sat and quivered. He had no idea what he was in for, but he knew that he hadn't liked anything that had happened so far and didn't think things were likely to change. The Vogon began to read a fetid little passage of his own devising. "Oh, Freddle Grunt Bugly," he began. Spasms racked Ford's body. This was worse than he'd ever been prepared for. "Thy miturations ought to be as purdled gabble blotchets on a Lerngrid bee." Went Ford Prefect, wrenching his head back as lumps of pain thumped through it. He could dimly see beside him Arthur lolling and rolling in his seat. He clenched his teeth. "Group, I employ thee," continued the merciless Vogon. "My footing turling dromes," his voice now rising to a horrible pitch of impassioned stridency, "and hooptiously drangle me with crinkly bindle wordles, or I will rend thee in the gobblewarts with my blurgle crunch, and see if I don't," cried Ford Prefect, and threw one final spasm as the electronic enhancement of the last line caught him a full blast across the temples, and he went limp. Arthur lolled. "Now, earthlings," whirred the Vogon. He didn't know that Ford Prefect was in fact from a very small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse, and wouldn't cared if he had. "I present you with a simple choice. Either die in the vacuum of space, or—" He paused for melodramatic effect. "Tell me how good you thought my poem was." And he threw himself backwards into a huge leathery bat-shaped seat and watched them. He did the smile again. Ford was rasping for breath. He rolled his dusty tongue round his parched mouth and moaned. Arthur said brightly. Actually, I quite liked it. Ford turned and gaped. Here was an approach that had quite simply not occurred to him. De Vogon raised a surprised eyebrow that effectively obscured his nose and was therefore no bad thing. "Oh, good," he whirred in considerable astonishment. "Oh, yes. I thought that some of the metaphysical imagery was really particularly effective." Ford continued to stare at him, slowly organizing his thoughts around this totally new concept. Were they really going to be able to bare-face their way out of this? "Yes, do continue," invited de Vogon. "Oh, and interesting rhythmic devices too, which seem to counterpoint the Ford leapt to his rescue, hazarding. "Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor of the And he floundered too, but Arthur was ready again. The humanity of the... Oh, it's vogonity, Ford hissed at him. Oh, yes, vogonity, sorry, of the poet's compassionate soul. Arthur felt that he was on a home stretch now, which contrives through the medium of the verse structure to sublimate this, transcend that, and come to terms with the fundamental dichotomies of the other. He was reaching for a triumphant crescendo. And one is left with a profound and vivid insight into... Which suddenly gave out on him, and Ford leapt in with the coup de grace. Into whatever the poem was about. Out of the corner of his mouth. Well done, Arthur, that was very good. De Vogon perused them. For a moment, his embittered racial soul had been touched. But he thought no, too little too late. His voice took on the quality of a cat snagging brushed nylon. So, what you're saying is that I write poetry because underneath my mean, callous, heartless exterior, I really just want to be loved? Is that right? Ford laughed nervously. Well, I mean, yes, but don't we all, deep down, you know? The Vogon stood up. Well, no. Well, you're completely wrong. I just write poetry to throw my mean, callous, heartless exterior into sharp relief. I'm going to throw you off the ship anyway. Guard, take the prisoners to number 3 airlock and throw them out. What? Shouted Ford. A huge young Vogon guard stepped forward and yanked them out of the straps with his huge blubbery arms. You can't throw us into space. We're trying to write a book. Resistance is useless, shouted the Vogon guard back at him. It was the first phrase he'd learnt when he joined the Vogon Guard Corps. The captain watched with a detached amusement and then turned away. Arthur stared round him wildly. I don't want to die now. I've still got a headache. I don't want to go to heaven with a headache. I'll be all cross and I wouldn't enjoy it. The guard grasped them both firmly round the neck and, bowing deferentially towards his captain's back, hiked them both protesting out of the bridge. The steel door closed and the captain was on his own again. He hummed quietly and mused to himself, lightly fingering his notebook of verses. Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor. He considered this for a moment, and then closed the book with a grim smile. Death's too good for them. The long, steel-lined corridor echoed to the feeble struggles of the 2 humanoids clamped firmly under rubbery Vogon armpits. Well, this is great, said Arthur. This is really terrific. Let go of me, you brute! The Vogon guard dragged them on. Don't you worry, said Ford. I'll think of something. But he didn't sound hopeful. Resistance is useless, bellowed the guard. Just don't say things like that, stammered Ford. How can anyone maintain a positive mental attitude if you're saying things like that? My God, complained Arthur. You're talking about a positive mental attitude, and you haven't even had your planet demolished today. I woke up this morning and thought I'd have a nice relaxed day, do a bit of reading, brush the dog, and now it's just after 4 in the afternoon, and I'm already being thrown out of an alien spaceship 6 light years away from the smoking remains of the Earth. He spluttered and gurgled as the Vogon tightened his grip. All right, said Ford, just stop panicking. Who said anything about panicking? Snapped Arthur. This is still just culture shock. You wait till I've settled down into the situation and found my bearings. Then I'll start panicking. Arthur, you're getting hysterical. Shut up. Ford tried desperately to think, but was interrupted by the guard shouting again. Resistance is useless! And you can shut up as well, snapped Ford. Resistance is useless! Oh, give it a rest, said Ford, and he twisted his head until he was looking straight up into his captor's face. And a thought struck him. Do you really enjoy this sort of thing? He asked suddenly. The Vogon stopped dead, and a look of immense stupidity seeped slowly over his face. Enjoy? He boomed. What do you mean? What I mean? Does it give you a full, satisfying life? Stomping around, shouting, pushing people out of spaceships? The Vogon stared up at the low steel ceiling, and his eyebrows almost rolled over each other. His mouth slacked. Finally he said, Well, the hours are good. They'd have to be, agreed Ford. Arthur twisted his head round to look at Ford. Ford, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just trying to take an interest in the world around me, okay? So the hours are pretty good then. The Vogon stared down at him as sluggish thoughts moiled around in the murky depths. Yeah, but now you come to mention it, most of the actual minutes are pretty lousy, except, and he thought again, which required looking at the ceiling, except some of the shouting I quite like. And he filled his lungs and bellowed, Resistance is... Sure, yeah, interrupted Ford hurriedly. You're good at that, I can tell. But if it's mostly lousy, he said slowly, giving the words time to reach their mark, then why do you do it? What is it? The girls, the leather, the machismo? Or do you just find that coming to terms with the mindless tedium of it all presents an interesting challenge? Arthur looked backwards and forwards between them in bafflement. I don't know. I think I just sort of do it, really. My aunt said that spaceship guard was a good career for a young Vogon. You know, the uniform, the low-slung stun ray holster, the mindless tedium. There you are, Arthur, said Ford, with an air of some reaching the conclusion of his argument. Do you think you've got problems? Arthur rather thought he had. Apart from the unpleasant business with his home planet, the Vogon guard had half throttled him already, and he didn't like the sound of being thrown into space very much. Try and understand his problem, insisted Ford. Here he is, poor lad. His entire life's work is stamping around, throwing people off spaceships. And shouting, added the guard. Yeah, and shouting, sure, said Ford, patting the blubbery arm clamped around his neck in friendly condescension. And he doesn't even know why he's doing it. Arthur agreed this was very sad. He did this with a small, feeble gesture, because he was too asphyxiated to speak. Deep rumblings of bemusement came from the guard. Well, now you put it like that, I suppose. Good lad, encouraged Ford. But all right, went on the rumblings. So what's the alternative? Well, said Ford, stop doing it, of course. Tell them you're not going to do it any more. He felt he ought to add something to that, but for the moment the guard seems to have his mind occupied pondering that much. Said the guard. Well, that doesn't sound that great to me. Ford suddenly felt the moment slipping away. Now, wait a minute. That's just the start, you see. There's more to it than that, you see. But at that moment the guard renewed his grip and continued his original purpose of lugging his prisoners to the airlock. He was obviously quite touched. "No, if I think it's all the same to you, I'd better get you both shoved out into this airlock and then go and get on with some other bits of shouting I've got to do." It wasn't all the same to Ford Prefect at all. "Oh, come on now, but look," he said, less slowly, less brightly. Said Arthur without any clear inflection. "But hang on," pursued Ford. "There's music and art and things to tell you about yet." "Resistance is useless," bellowed the guard, and then added, "You see, if I keep it up, I can eventually get promoted to senior shouting officer. And there aren't usually many vacancies for non-shouting and non-pushing people about officers, so I think I'd better stick with what I know." They had now reached the airlock, a large circular steel hatchway of massive strength and weight let into the inner skin of the craft. The guard operated a control and the hatchway swung smoothly open. "But thanks for taking an interest," said the Vogon guard. "Bye now." And he flung Ford and Arthur through the hatchway into a small chamber within. Arthur lay panting on for breath. Ford scrambled round and flung his shoulder uselessly against the reclosing hatchway. "But listen," he shouted at the guard. "There's a whole world you don't know about. Here, how about this?" He desperately grabbed for the only bit of culture he knew offhand, and he hummed the first bar of Beethoven's Fifth. Da-da-da-dum. Doesn't that stir anything in you? "No," said the guard, "not really, but I'll mention it to my aunt." If he said anything further after that, it was lost. The hatchway sealed itself tight, and all sound was lost bar the faint distant hum of the ship's engines. They were in a brightly polished cylindrical chamber about 6 feet in diameter and 10 feet long. Ford looked round it, panting. "Potentially bright lad, I thought," he said, and slumped against the curved wall. Arthur was still lying in the curve of the floor where he had fallen. He didn't look up. He just lay panting. "We're trapped now, aren't we?" "Yes," said Ford, "we're trapped." "Well, you didn't think of anything. I thought you said you were going to think of something. Perhaps you thought of something and I didn't notice." "Oh, yes, I thought of something," panted Ford. Arthur looked up expectantly. "But unfortunately, it rather involved being on the other side of this airtight hatchway." And they kicked the hatch they had just been thrown through. "But it was a good idea, was it?" "Oh, yes, very neat." "What was it?" "Well, I hadn't worked out the details yet. It's not much point now, is there?" "Oh, so, what happens next?" asked Arthur. Well, the hatchway in front of us will open automatically in a few moments and we'll shoot out into deep space, I expect, and asphyxiate. If you're taking a lungful of air with you, you can last up for 30 seconds, of course," said Ford. He stuck his hands behind his back, raised his eyebrows, and started to hum an old Beetlejuicean battle hymn. To Arthur's eyes, he suddenly looked very alien. "So this is it? We're going to die?" "Yes. Except... No, wait a minute." He suddenly lunged across the chamber at something behind Arthur's line of vision. "What's this switch?" he cried. "What? Where?" cried Arthur, twisting round. "No, I was only fooling. We are going to die after all." He slumped against the wall again and carried on the tune from where he left off. "You know, it's times like this when I'm trapped in a Vogon airlock with a man from Beetlejuice and about to die of asphyxiation in deep space, that I really wished I'd listened to what my mother told me when I was young." "Why? What did she tell you?" "I don't know. I didn't listen." Oh, Ford carried on humming. "This is terrific," Arthur thought to himself. "Nelson's column gone, McDonald's have gone, and all that's left is me, and the world's mostly harmless. Any second now, all that will be left is mostly harmless. And yesterday the planet seemed to be going so well." A motor whirred. A slight hiss built into a deafening roar of rushing air as the outer hatchway opened onto an empty blackness studded with tiny, impossibly bright points of light. Ford and Arthur popped into outer space like corks from a toy gun. Chapter 8. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a wholly remarkable book. It has been compiled and recompiled many times over, under many different editorships. It contains contributions from countless numbers of travellers and researchers. The introduction begins like this. Space is big, really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Listen. And so on. After a while, the style settles down a bit, and it begins to tell you the things you really need to know. Like the fact that the fabulously beautiful planet Bethselemen is now so worried about the cumulative erosion by 10 billion visiting tourists a year that any net imbalance between the amount you eat and the amount you excrete whilst on the planet is surgically removed from your body weight when you leave. So every time you go to the lavatory there, it's vitally important you get a receipt. To be fair, though, when confronted by the sheer enormity of the distances between the stars, better minds than the one responsible for the guide's introduction have faltered. Some invite you to consider for a moment a peanut in Reading and a small walnut in Johannesburg, and other such dizzying concepts. The simple truth is that interstellar distances will not fit into the human imagination. Even light, which travels so fast that it takes most racers thousands of years to realize that it travels at all, takes time to journey between the stars. It takes 8 minutes to journey from the star Sol to the place where the Earth used to be, and 4 years more to arrive at Sol's nearest stellar neighbour, Alpha Proxima. For light to reach the other side of the galaxy, for it to reach Damagran, for instance, it takes rather longer, 500,000 years. The record for hitchhiking this distance is just under 5 years, but you don't get to see much on the way. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says that if you hold a lungful of air, you can survive in the total vacuum of space for about 30 seconds. However, it does go on to say that, what with space being the mind-boggling size it is, the chances of being picked up by another ship within those 30 seconds are 2 to the power of 267,709 to 1 against. By a totally staggering coincidence, that is also the telephone number of an Islington flat, where Arthur once went to a very good party and met a very nice girl whom he totally failed to get off with. She went off with a gate crasher. Though the planet Earth, the Islington flat, and the telephone have all now been demolished, it is comforting to reflect that they are all in some way commemorated by the fact that 29 seconds later, Ford and Arthur were rescued. Chapter 9. A computer chattered to itself in alarm as it noticed an airlock open and close itself for no apparent reason. This was because reason was in fact out to lunch. A hole had just appeared in the galaxy. It was exactly a nothing of a second long, a nothing of an inch wide, and quite a lot of millionths of light years from end to end. As it closed up, lots of paper hats and party balloons fell out of it and drifted off through the universe. A team of 7 3-foot-high market analysts fell out of it and died, partly of asphyxiation, partly of surprise. 239,000 lightly fried eggs fell out of it too, materializing in a large wobbly heap on the famine-struck land of Pogril in the Pansel system. The whole Pogril tribe had died out from famine except for one man who died of cholesterol poisoning some weeks later. The nothing of a second for which the whole existed reverberated backwards and forwards through time in a most improbable fashion. Somewhere in the deeply remote past, it seriously traumatized the small random group of atoms drifting through the empty sterility of space and made them cling together in the most extraordinarily unlikely patterns. These patterns quickly learned to copy themselves. This was part of what was so extraordinary about the patterns, and went on to cause massive trouble on every planet they drifted onto, and that's how life began in the universe. 5 wild event maelstroms swirled in vicious storms of unreason and spewed up a pavement. On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent, gulping like half-spent fish. "There you are," gasped Ford, scrabbling for a finger hold on the pavement as it raced through the Third Reich of the unknown. "I told you I'd think of something." Oh, sure," said Arthur. "Sure. Oh, it was a bright idea of mine, to find a passing spaceship and get rescued by it." The real universe arched sickeningly away beneath them. Various pretend ones flitted silently by like mountain goats. Primal light exploded, splattering space-time as with goblets of junket. Time blossomed, matter shrank away. The highest prime number coalesced quietly in a corner and hid itself away forever. "Oh, come off it. The chances against it were astronomical." "Don't knock it, it worked," said Ford. "Well, what sort of ship are we in?" asked Arthur, as the pit of eternity yawned beneath them. I don't know," said Ford. "I haven't opened my eyes yet." "Well, nor have I," said Arthur. The universe jumped, froze, quivered, and splayed out in several unexpected directions. Arthur and Ford opened their eyes and looked about in considerable surprise. "Good God! It looks just like the seafront at Southend." "Hell, I'm relieved to hear you say that," said Ford. "Why?" "Because I thought I must be going mad." "Well, perhaps you are. Perhaps you only thought I said it." Ford thought about this. "Well, did you say it or didn't you?" "Well, I think so." "Well, perhaps we're both going mad then." "Yes. We'd be mad, all things considered, to think this was Southend." "Well, do you think this is Southend?" "Oh, yes." "Oh, so do I." "Well, therefore we must be mad." "Well, it's a nice day for it." "Yes," said a passing maniac. "Who was that?" "Who? The man with the 5 heads and the elderberry bush full of kippers?" "Yes." "I don't know. Just someone." "Ah." They both sat on the pavement and watched with a certain unease as huge children bounced heavily along the sand and wild horses thundered through the sky, taking fresh supplies of reinforced railings to the uncertain areas. "You know," said Arthur, "if this is Southend, There's something very odd about it. What do you mean, the way the sea stays steady as a rock and the buildings keep washing up and down? Yes, I thought that was odd too. In fact, he continued, as with a huge bang Southend split itself into 6 equal segments, which danced and span giddily round each other in lewd and sensuous formations. There's something altogether very strange going on. Wild yowling noises of pipes and strings seared through the wind. Hot doughnuts popped out of the road for 10p each. Horrid fish stormed out of the sky, and Arthur and Ford decided to make a run for it. They plunged through heavy walls of sound, mountains of archaic thought, valleys of mood music, bad shoe sessions, and footling bats, and suddenly heard a girl's voice. It sounded quite a sensible voice, but it just said, 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against and falling. And that was all. Ford skidded down a beam of light and span round, trying to find a source for the voice, but could see nothing he could seriously believe in. "What was that voice?" shouted Arthur. "I don't know," yelled Ford. "I don't know. It sounded like a measurement of probability." "Probability? What do you mean?" Probability, like 2 to the 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 4 against. It said 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against. I mean, that's pretty improbable, A 1,000,000-gallon vat of custard upended itself over them without warning. "But what does it mean?" cried Arthur. "What, the custard?" "No, the measurement of improbability." I don't know. I don't know at all. I think we're on some kind of spaceship." "I can only assume that this is not the first-class compartment." Bulges appeared in the fabric of space-time, great ugly bulges. said Arthur, as he felt his body softening and bending in unusual directions. "Southend seems to be melting away. The stars are swirling a dust bowl. My legs are drifting off into the sunset. My left arm's come off too." A frightening thought struck him. "Hell, how am I going to operate my digital watch now?" He wound his eyes desperately around in Ford's direction. "Ford, you're turning into a penguin. Stop it!" Again came the voice. 2 to the power of 75,000 to 1 against and falling." Ford waddled around in his pond in a furious circle. "Hey, who are you?" he quacked. "Where are you? What's going on? And is there any way of stopping this?" "Please relax," said the voice pleasantly, like a stewardess in an airliner, with only 1 wing, 2 engines, and 1 which is on fire. "You are perfectly safe." "Well, that's not the point," raged Ford. "The point is that now I'm a perfectly safe penguin and my colleague is rapidly running out of limbs." "Oh, it's all right. I've got them back now," said Arthur. 2 to the power of 50,000 to 1 against and falling," said the voice. "Admittedly, they're a bit longer than I usually like, but—" "Isn't there anything," squawked Ford, in avian fury, "you feel you ought to be telling us?" The voice cleared its throat. A giant petit fleur lolloped off into the distance. "Welcome to the starship Heart of Gold. Please do not be alarmed by anything you see or hear around you. You are bound to feel some initial ill effects as you have been rescued from certain death at an improbability level of 2 to the power of 276,000 to 1 against, possibly much higher. We are now cruising at a level of 2 to the power of 25,000 to 1 against and falling, and we will be restoring normality just as soon as we are sure what is normal anyway. Thank you. 2 to the power of 20,000 to 1 against and falling." The voice cut out. Ford and Arthur were in a small, luminous pink cubicle. Ford was wildly excited. "Arthur, this is fantastic! We've been picked up by a ship powered by the infinite improbability drive. This is incredible! I heard rumours about it before, but they were all officially denied. But they must have done it. They've built the improbability drive, Arthur. This is... Arthur, what's happening?" Arthur had jammed himself against the door to the cubicle, trying to hold it closed, but it was ill-fitting. Tiny little furry hands were squeezing themselves through the cracks. Their fingers were ink-stained. Tiny voices chatted insanely. Arthur looked up. "Ford, there's an infinite number of monkeys outside who want to talk to us about this script for Hamlet they've worked out."